Japanese game development studio FromSoftware has carved out a unique niche in the gaming industry with its distinctive approach to game design. They are renowned for pioneering the Soulslike genre, which emphasizes challenging gameplay, minimal hand-holding, and a deep sense of accomplishment upon overcoming difficult obstacles. The storytelling in their games is often indirect, allowing players to uncover the lore and narrative through piecing together environmental clues. This approach encourages player engagement and speculation, leading to a vibrant community of fans discussing theories and interpretations. The worlds that FromSoftware create are meticulously crafted, featuring dark, immersive environments that draw the player in. The intricate level design, full of secrets and shortcuts, rewards exploration and experimentation. Their consistent delivery of high-quality games has set a high bar for the industry. Their success with titles like Dark Souls and Elden Ring has not only garnered a dedicated fanbase, but also influenced other developers and games. Their dedication to challenging the status quo of game design, combined with their commitment to quality and innovation, has solidified their reputation as a developer that both respects and inspires its players. Their games are not just products, they are experiences that resonate with gamers on a deeper level, making FromSoftware a truly special developer in the modern gaming landscape. Hello and welcome back to the neighborhood, and welcome to the 4th episode of Dark Souls Month. For the first 3 weeks of April, we released episodes on Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3. This episode, we will rank all of the FromSoft games and discuss those rankings. And the final episode of April will be a community discussion of Soulslike games. So now, let's dive in to our ranking of the FromSoft Souls-style games.
Each of us has prepared our rankings for the FromSoft Soul-style games, meaning Dark Souls 1 through 3, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Demon Souls, and Sekiro. So before you jump in the comments and tell us about their random Monster Hunter game that they made, or Armored Core, or Kingsfield, we're just looking at kind of the genesis of the Dark Soul or the Souls-like genre forward. We'll start our list at number 7 and work our way down to number 1, discussing the games as they come up. So without further ado, let's kick off with number 7.
And shout out to Armored Core 6. I have played that game. It's the only Armored Core game that I have played, but I had a really good time with it. It's not going to make the list proper, but I have played it since the last time that we did this exercise.
Yeah.
And I had a really good time with it. So definitely worth checking out. It just doesn't quite fit the parameters of what this is.
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed. I have to play, what's that game? Norman Reedus and the Funky Fetus.
Oh, yeah. Death Stranding.
Death Stranding. I have to play Death Stranding in no small part because Armored Core 6 was not a Souls-like, as I predicted.
Yeah.
So
who should go first with number 7?
I mean, I don't care.
I'll kick it off.
Okay.
I put Dark Souls at number 7.
Wow. Starting off strong.
To be fair, this whole list, it's like, I think the lowest ranking I've given any of these games is a B.
Yeah, I was going to say, this list kind of to me feels like, hey, rank your favorite Lord of the Rings trilogy movies, best to worst. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, the worst one is still not bad. The worst one is still a masterpiece. So
it's also like, what mood am I in? Because sometimes I might prefer the Fellowship of the Ring over Return of the King, depending on what day it is. But yeah,
exactly.
That's a good point. So I put Dark Souls here.
So you have beaten it now.
I did beat it. Yep. For Dark Souls month, I beat the whole game. Didn't do the DLC. Did use a guide. And I had a good time with it. It has aged the most, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Primarily because Demon Souls has a remake. I'm sure that if I went back and tried to play Demon Souls, that would for sure be the roughest.
Yeah.
But Yeah, it just, in my opinion, I mean, I think it and 2 probably show their age relatively equally.
Yeah,
I just have a soft spot for 2, and so that kind of bumped it up a little bit. But had I played 1 first, or like had 1 clicked with me like 2 did, then maybe they would be swapped. But just not having the nostalgia and just the age, 1 showing its age. If we got a proper remake of 1, like a Blue Point remake, that could do a lot for it. But I still think that there's just a lot of obtuseness and a lot of stuff that we discussed in our episode that FromSoft has learned from and adapted to and has improved on or reiterated on. And I think that in a post everything else they've released world, Dark Souls 1 just shows its age the most. I do think that it's still a good game, and what they did for the time, and especially with like level design and the interconnectivity, all that really awesome. There was just like 1 too many pain points for it to get much higher on the list for me.
Yeah, like Dark Souls 1 is definitely, I think at this point, it sometimes feels like it's been almost done a disservice because of how old it is, in just that it can feel very old, and sometimes you can forget, hey, this was one of the first Souls-likes. The Souls-like genre spawned out of like Demon Souls, and Dark Souls was, I hesitate to call it mainstream, but it definitely had more eyes on it than Demon Souls, partially because it was multi-platform, but also FromSoftware's trajectory just into the mainstream has only gone up with each game that they've released, you know? And so Dark Souls was a lot of people's first dipping of the toe into the Souls-like genre. And I think a lot of people forget that that game is 13 years old. And, you know, like at the time, there weren't really a whole lot of other games like that. But
I was going to say it was the Souls-like genre. It was
the Souls, yeah, pretty much. But now going and playing games, like especially going back, it can feel like going. Some people really enjoy going back and playing like a PS2 game or a PS3 game or something like that, or, you know, an original Xbox game. And there are games that I appreciate like that. Dark Souls is one of them. Like, it came out on the original 360 during that time. I don't even think like the update version was out yet. It might have been, I don't know. But maybe it was releasing around that time.
It had to be, because the Xbox One was 2013.
Yeah. So, but it was still like an old piece of hardware. And so going back to it, it feels old. They did the remaster, but they did the remaster in like 2015, something like that. And they just kind of upscaled it. They didn't make it look nicer.
Yeah, no, it's still an old remaster. Yeah, not anything else.
So it's still an old looking game. It still has some old feeling systems. And I think that's more evident because a lot more people have played things like Elden Ring. And so now going back and seeing kind of where a lot of it began, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of quality of life stuff that I really appreciate about the newer games in this series. That said, for me, Dark Souls, it's higher up on my list than 7. But Dark Souls, to me, is like peak exploration in the Souls-like series, just because of how interconnected that world was, how little it held your hand. Like, now there's a whole, you can go through with walkthroughs and stuff. When I played it in, 2011, 2012, it was a lot harder to find those walkthroughs on the internet than it is today. And so that sense of like exploration and discovery, especially how from pretty much your start, like the starting bonfire, you can go 3 or 4 different directions right from the get-go. That whole sense of like choose your own direction is really cool, I think. The bosses are way more simplistic than they have grown. There's kind of an arms race of, oh, well, you've played through Dark Souls, so now we have to make our bosses a little bit more complicated in every subsequent game. And so
that's how we get the eternal wind up in Lies of P.
Exactly. And so going back to Dark Souls, it's like, oh, this is a pretty basic, like it swings horizontally, it swings vertically, and then it has a move where it hits 3 times. And if I can learn those 3 things, I can beat this boss. So that's in some ways kind of refreshing. Like difficulty wise, if you're just looking at the bosses, I do think this is the easiest Souls-like, minus maybe Demon Souls, because I haven't fully played that one. But
yeah, I think just playing through the game, it's not like Dark Souls is not hard because of its enemies and because of its bosses. There are some definite like gank moments in Dark Souls, but it's just hard because
it doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah, the game doesn't help you at all. You mentioned there being like 3 different directions you can go.
Yeah.
2 of those you will die.
Yeah, correct.
Unless you knew which starting item to get, specifically why you're going that direction, the secrets. Like basically, it's the reason I like it's something I love now about Bloodborne is that game is so comfortable to me.
Yeah.
And so when you hit that level with these games, they kind of morph into something different. But that initial playthrough, the first time I remember trying to play Dark Souls, coming from games like Skyrim, and had I played The Witcher 2 at that point? Maybe. But like coming from those kind of games, Shadows of Mordor, other kind of fantasy guy with sword games, going into Dark Souls and being like, this feels bad.
Yeah.
Not understanding what the game was trying to do at the time, not understanding the language of it. That's what makes Dark Souls difficult. Because, I think that a lot of it is simple just because of the era it comes from. Even going back to like Demon Souls Remake, you can see the bosses are still pretty simple. They just look a lot nicer. So it's just kind of from that era. But because they were so like saying, I feel like a lot of the From games you can say don't hold your hand. And I feel like some more than others are actually out to get you.
Yeah.
And Dark Souls 1 is out to get you.
Yeah. There are definitely some points in it where it is out to get you for sure. But yeah, it is higher up on my list. I think it's a fantastic game. And I can definitely understand putting it at the bottom, especially it's the one that I feel like more than any other FromSoftware game gets looked at with the most generous of rose-tinted glasses. It is the one that if somebody played it as one of their first ones or their first one, or played it back in like 2011, 2012, 2013, I think now they look at it and they're like, oh, it's such a masterpiece. Similar to me, where I'm like, yes, I do love this game and I think it's an S, even though objectively now I can look at it and be like, it's not though. So
yeah, I think like a lot of us this millennial age, we have those games from that era that are just close to our heart. And I think that's Dark Souls for a lot of people.
Exactly.
So I'm curious to see if we're going to talk about Sekiro next.
We are. You knew it was coming. You knew.
I didn't know if you were going to like do the honorable thing and put the game you haven't played yet or have barely played yet at number 7, or if you were going to stick to your guns and put Sekiro at number 7.
I am sticking to my guns. I am putting Sekiro at number 7. So all of these games I think are fantastic, great games. Sekiro for me is the one. It's tough because I really like it aesthetically. I think the combat 90% of the time is very fun. I like the movement throughout the world. I like sort of the grappling hook arm thing that you've got going on. I like the whole arm thing where you get to swap out the different special attacks and that sort of a thing. And just the fact that the story is so much more straightforward for a FromSoft game than almost any other game on the list. I feel like I could walk away from Sekiro with an idea of what's going on, even without watching 3 hours of YouTube essays, versus most of the other games that we're going to talk about on this list, unless I really tried and walked away with 3 hours and like watched about 8 hours of YouTube essays, I could kind of have an idea of what's going on. My main complaint with Sekiro is it hits a point for me where it's so unforgiving in its boss battles that it becomes tedious in my mind. Some of that, I'm sure, is, like the traditional FromSoft, just get good mindset, where I'm just not good enough at the game to not get frustrated with it. But every other FromSoftware game on this list, when I would get to a boss, if I lost, it felt fair and it felt avoidable and it felt, for the most part, and it felt if I just gave it one more shot, I would be fine. In Sekiro, almost every single boss encounter in that game, every big boss encounter, like Lady Butterfly, like those kind of level of bosses, not little mini bosses and stuff, but the big bosses, I would go in, I would very quickly learn what I needed to do. I would learn their moveset, know when I needed to parry. It's just every single one of them has like a 5 or 6 hit or 40 hit combo. And any hit that you take fully is taking at least a third of your health. And so you have very little room for error, and whittling the boss's poise and health down takes so much time that inevitably I would like fuck up, and there would be, it's like, oh, well, now this attempt is over just because I can't recover from getting hit by 2 of these hits in this combo. Like the boss is not going to give me the space and time to heal. And it's not that I don't know what I need to do. It's just that physically I am not executing it. And so to me, that just grew tedious. Like I said, I really loved the combat 90% of the time. Like wandering around the level, that combat feels great. Like sneaking around, being a shinobi, like backstabbing people, fighting the mini bosses. Like I love all of that. But then I would hit a boss battle and it was just like, it would grind to a halt. I'd do like 20 attempts as I'm, just like tapping left bumper to deflect and slowly build up their poise meter so that I can do a backstab. But then I have to do 3 of those. And it's, like a 15-20 minute experience to fight this boss. And if you mess up at all, it's basically run over, That's the part that I disliked. And I did weirdly enjoy the Demon of Hatred fight, which I know is like most people's like most hated fight and the supposedly hardest boss in it. But to me, that one felt much more like a like Bloodborne or Dark Souls type of boss than it did a Sekiro boss. So, but this game overall is awesome. There are so many moments in it that I really love. I like the giant snake part. That's awesome. The boss fight you have against the dragon, like that whole action movie, like or action game craziness fight is really fun. The fight where it's the monk that like disappears and you have to like go solve like the puzzles or whatever. Maybe that's not a boss fight. Maybe that's just
the
like
monkeys. You mean?
Yes, the monkeys. That one.
Yeah. It's like a gimmick fight.
Yeah,
because you do have to hit them. But yeah.
Like I think Sekiro has some of the best gimmick fights in all of FromSoftware's catalog. But like I said, getting to like your more traditional bosses in this game, it was like, I did not enjoy being stuck for like 2 or 3 nights in a row on each boss because it was just a test of patience, really. Because like I said, I felt like I knew what to do. It's just I had trouble executing it, which is never a place that I liked being in. Like every other FromSoftware game, it's like, okay, I know what to do, and I feel like it's possible for me to actually do this. And if I die, I'm not worried. Like it's a little frustrating, but like, okay, I can do this. Whereas Sekiro is just like, come on, like let me, like I've done this so much, I know what to do. It's just, oops, I was half a millisecond late on that deflect, and so now I'm dead. So, and there's no real way to like, in most other games, you can go like farm up souls or like upgrade your weapon or, do something like that. Sekiro, it's pretty much just like you either beat this guy or you don't. Anyway, that's my ramble on Sekiro and why it is number 7 on my list. Again, I don't think this game is terrible, but it is hands down by a long shot my least favorite FromSoftware Soulslike, even below a game that I have only put maybe an hour into. So,
yeah, Sekiro is obviously higher on my list. Really like this game a lot. I agree that some of the bosses, like I was thinking about how long it took me to beat Owl the second time you fight him. Some of the bosses are much more of a like pattern memorization, pixel perfect, almost more like a Cuphead kind of experience versus let me get in here and experiment with my moves and experiment with like my build and stuff like that. That is the typical kind of FromSoft methodology. In Sekiro, it's like, no, you need to be attacking here. You need to be standing here when he does this. You need to dodge this way for this. You need to counter this with this specific counter. And like, if you don't do that, you're going to get punished. And there were definitely times where that was tough and could be tedious. There's probably like 3 or 4 bosses that I really like that were tough. I do think though that because they're so intentional and difficult, that they're also some of the most visually and thematically impressive bosses that FromSoft has ever done. Like when you're fighting Genichiro and he starts throwing lightning and stuff, and then you're throwing it back and you're countering his blows just right. Like when it flows well, some people will take like really well done Sekiro boss fights and they'll like slow them down to show the animations and the counters and connections and stuff. And it looks incredible. It's like something out of an action movie or like a kung fu movie or something.
Yeah.
Super well like choreographed. And so I think that Sekiro is their attempt at a much more action focused style of game. And I think they did a really good job at it. They were uncompromising in that vision. And it's the game that if you don't click with it, you're not like, there's no other option. Yeah. There's no, well, why don't you try a skill build or why don't you try magic or whatever. It's learn how to parry, learn how the game works. And then if that works for you, you're going to have fun. If not, you're not. I do think there's some really cool stuff they did system wise. Cause you're still essentially traveling from bonfire to bonfire. Although a lot of them are really close together. A lot of the levels are a lot shorter and a lot less explorative. It feels much more linear than a lot of their other games, but you get extra lives in Sekiro. Like when you die, you can come back as you progress through the game. You can come back up to like 3 times. There's a way for you to hold down a button and mass loot everything around you.
Super nice.
Yeah, like the grappling hook and traversal that you talked about, super fun. It's like the fastest, most fluid feeling FromSoft game.
Yes.
Going from Sekiro into Elden Ring's jump was like, wait, is this the same studio? Like, I appreciate they put a jump in Elden Ring, but it feels so clunky compared to what they did in Sekiro.
Yeah.
But yes, it's definitely the most like learn it and perfect it or don't play it out of all their catalog. Whereas what I said with Dark Souls, the game and the combat is not difficult. It's more of the age and the systems and the not telling you stuff. Sekiro is the exact opposite. And I think that clicked with me more.
Yeah.
Because I had a pretty steep learning curve with the combat system, but once it clicked, I just had a ton of fun with this game. So yeah, it comes up a little higher on my list.
Well, and I think your Cuphead analogy is fantastic because it is that, like, now that you've said that, I'm like, exactly, because it is very much the thing where I enjoyed aspects of Cuphead and I could appreciate that Cuphead was a good game for people that like that type of game.
Yeah.
But then I'd hit the bosses and it's like, okay, I know what I have to do in this boss. I've seen all the moves. It's just executing it. There's so little room for error that it borders on tedious again for me. That's another one of the games that I'm just like, yeah, like I appreciate it for what it is, but it's tedious. So it is. Sekiro is one that I would like to go back and play again, especially having beaten it and being more familiar with the systems and everything now. to see just like, does it click? Does it flow a little bit better? Is it a game where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, now that I've played it, another playthrough of it goes a lot more smoothly just because I'm aware of what I need to do and how to play it. But it's number 7. So now we're going to move on to number 6, though. So what is number 6 on your list?
So for me, I put Demon Souls.
Same.
At number 6. I put the remake of Demon Souls there. A game that I really enjoyed and that I think holds up really well with the remake, because the remake is the best looking FromSoft game, which it's not. It's made by Blue Point, the remake is. But it looks incredible, and down to like the animations, like the way the character moves and the way they swing their weapon and they interact with enemies when they do like a backstab and stuff, and the audio cues and all of that is so excellent, like masterfully done, because Blue Point, they had the game.
Yeah.
So they were able to spend their time and resources on stuff like that. And it really elevates the experience. Like FromSoft came out and said after they saw how good Demon Souls looked, they went back and started like sprucing up Elden Ring some more, because they were like, we gotta, this is our game, it's our competition, like 1-to-1. I mean, it's not open world or whatever. And so
right.
And Elden Ring does not look as good as Demon Souls remake. It's
different category,
it's open world. Yeah, it's a way bigger game doing way more kind of imaginative stuff. But yeah, at its core though, Demon Souls is again just a really cool blueprint to see like where FromSoft started out and where they would go from here. They did the Bloodborne has a lot in common with Demon Souls kind of structurally, and you're in a hub, you pick which level you're going to go into, you explore 3 levels in that level that are all connected, and each of the starts of those new 3 has like a bonfire, but that's it for the level as far as I can remember, and everything kind of loops back to that. So the level design within the like core levels is pretty interesting because it's built around that.
Yeah.
But the world is not connected in any way like Dark Souls would be, which is one of the reasons Dark Souls was so impressive at the time. Because Demon Souls is like 5 distinct worlds. It feels a lot more video gamey. Like, okay, we're hopping into World 1-1, and then you go into World 1-2, and then 1-3, and then you're done with World 1. And then you can take, once you've beat the boss of the first zone, you can go into any world. And so then there's some strategies of like, oh, I want to try to rush into this harder one and get a weapon that's really good for my build and whatever. But overall, just really enjoyed the aesthetics, really enjoyed the modern update, being able to experience this old game in like a modern way.
Yeah.
And I think it still holds up. There are definitely some frustrating bosses from the early days. There's some really gimmicky bosses. It's one that I've toyed around with replaying because I haven't replayed it since like I didn't get my PS5 immediately at launch, so I think I played this a little bit after launch, but it was pretty close.
Yeah.
And I haven't played it since, but I do get the itch every now and then to be like, maybe I should boot up Demon Souls again and try, because I did like a hybrid sword and magic kind of, I think it was like the royalty build or whatever. I'm kind of curious, like maybe I should go in and do like a pure strength, or maybe I should go in and do pure casting, or just try a different build from what I did last time and see how it goes. So I really like it. Whenever you finally acquire a PlayStation 5 like that, it's one of the ones at the top of the list that I think you should dive into.
Yeah, it's definitely one that is on the top of my list to play once I eventually pick up a PlayStation 5. I have gotten a chance to play, like I said, maybe an hour or 2 of it across a few different play sessions on your PlayStation. And I feel like I played enough of it to kind of look at it and be like, okay, I understand what this game is. It feels to me very similar to Dark Souls and to Bloodborne and that sort of thing. And I can look at it and know that I would, like, even though I haven't beaten the game, I know that I will I would be shocked if I did not like it more than Sekiro. It's one that is at 6 only because I dislike Sekiro and because I haven't played it. It's one that I could see potentially bumping up once I do play it, just because of how nice it looks and just the sort of seeing kind of where, like, a lot of the systems interest me, like the world state. Is that what they call it?
There's like a light and dark state for the world, which affects, it's called world tendency.
That, yeah.
And it affects certain enemies and drops, and some like doors won't be open, and if your tendency is dark, or if it isn't dark, it won't be open. It's something I didn't really meddle with much because it feels very like you have to really dive into Demon Souls to manipulate those kind of things, but it is cool that it's there if you want to like play around with it.
Yeah, because like those kind of systems seem very cool and seem a lot different from like future FromSoft games and what they did, and so I'm interested in getting to play it more. And like I said, I think it's one where I've played enough of it to kind of understand, like, okay, this is sort of the precursor to Dark Souls. There are obviously a lot of more modern quality of life things that have been done, but also getting to play the remake, it looks nice. It's been updated a little bit, like just systems wise, and it is a style of game that I enjoy a little bit more than like your Sekiro type of game. So, like I said, it's one I could see potentially even bumping up a little bit. You know, if we come back in 2 or 3 years and do this ranking again, once FromSoft's next game comes out, you know, I think we could see that move up the list, especially if I've gotten a PlayStation.
It does have my like kind of least favorite mechanic that carried on through the Dark Souls series of hollowing, or whatever they call it in Demon Souls, where if you're not in your human form, you get half your health. But then, of course, it's same thing with like invasions and like different. You can interact with different things. Like you can't summon NPCs or whatever. And that was all in Demon Souls, and they carried that through.
Yeah,
in different variations all the way through Dark Souls 3, and I'm glad it's not in Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring. But cool. So we had the same number 6. Guess that means it's time for number 5.
Yes.
Number 5 is where I put Elden Ring. No, I'm just kidding.
I was about to say, whoa, your list is way different than I expected.
Number 5 for me is Dark Souls 2.
Okay. I can see that.
So Dark Souls 2 got bumped down a little bit probably from the last time we did this because Elden Ring has come out, and just Dark Souls month, I got reacquainted with and familiarized myself with 1 and 3, and so just the list shifted a little bit. But Dark Souls 2 definitely beating out the other games that it's ahead of, because it was kind of like I played it way late. I didn't play it when it came out, but I still kind of have that nostalgia for it because I tried 1 a few times and never really stuck with it. And then I played 3 pretty much like, I would say 70% co-op with you. And so we kind of like steamrolled the game. And Dark Souls 2 was the one that, with the exception of like, oh, I need to like, let me just look this thing up real quick. Like I went into it blind pretty much. And I had the kind of true Dark Souls experience with 2. I went in sword and shield and just kind of fumbled my way around and beat the game with a suboptimal build and, just stuff I had cobbled together, stats that I had allocated as I was going, things like that. And because of that, like it just has a special place in my heart. Yeah. Revisiting it for this month, like some of the pain points stuck out to me a little bit more about like the early game.
Yeah, every year this game gets older, and that does not do it any kindness. So
it would be really amazing in a perfect world to get Demon Souls remakes of Dark Souls 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I doubt that'll ever happen. I mean, anything's possible, especially in this day and age of kind of capitalizing on games that we've already released. But
Yeah.
as it stands, like,
Whoa, they're not Naughty Dog. They'll pay somebody else to remaster their game, not
Well,
just
yeah.
live on their laurels.
they're definitely gonna make money off of it, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dark Souls 2. I played Scholar as well. I haven't ever played the original Dark Souls 2, but yeah, I think it's one of the harder Dark Souls games to get like momentum going with, but once you do it, it's really rewarding. And I started with Bloodborne, which is similar, not because it's obtuse, but just because they front load a lot of enemies, and like they're really trying to teach you how that combat system works and how to like approach the game. And so like the beginning of that game is a major hump for a lot of people. And so I think starting with that made Dark Souls 2 like, oh yeah, I'm getting the like crap kicked out of me in these early levels, but that's okay. I'll keep going. You know, I wasn't, it didn't discourage me too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a good time with it. And so it landed almost smack dab in the middle of my list here.
Yeah. And it has a special place in my heart. Like Dark Souls 2 was the first Dark Souls that I beat by myself. I got it midnight day of release, which, you know, is not really a thing that people do a whole lot anymore.
No.
Like went to the store and bought it midnight, brought it home, played it, because you could just pop in the game and play it at that point.
I'll say last physical game you ever bought.
Yeah. Well, no. I have a surprising amount of the Dark Souls games on physical. I have about like 50% of them physically, which is weird.
As 1.5?
I have two, like the 360 version I had digitally or physically. I have Dark Souls 3 physically, and I have Bloodborne physically. So out of the 6 that I own 3 of them physically. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's so for me going through it was that it, you know, launch experience of like nobody knows what's going on yet. There are no guides online because everyone is just kind of figuring this out as they go by themselves. And I played the original first. I didn't like Scholar came out like a year and a half later, but I got a chance to kind of like go in. I went through the game, really loved it, had a great time just exploring and figuring the game out by myself. I'm very much like you, where I just kind of put points wherever and, you know, found a cool weapon that I liked and, you know, like went through with that. I had played enough of Dark Souls 1 at that point that I knew, like I understood the language of the game enough to like have a good time in Dark Souls 2. And there just were so many awesome parts of like Dark Souls 2, like little, you know, figuring out that like, oh, there is actually something down the well in Majula that I need to get. And, you know, like, oh, there's a whole other area down here. And figuring out that you could talk to Scorpion Man in that one spot.
Oh, right.
And, you know, finding the bird person that made your weapons and, you know, like just all of those random little things that rewarded exploring the levels. I thought was really, really cool. And Scholar of the First Sins, I thought was an interesting shift and change to things just because like it is sometimes almost like playing a new game going back through that. Cause I have such a memory of certain parts of the original game that I'll walk into an area and be like, what is all of this nonsense that's going on here? This isn't where you're supposed to be. This is like, there's supposed to be an enemy over here. So like going back through the levels since I've been replaying some of it for Dark Souls month has been kind of a trip because I'm like, oh yeah, that's not actually in this version of the game. I also like some of the things that this did. Like you said, I do think that it's one of the more difficult ones just very early on because they tie your dodge invincibility to a stat. And so that's a little bit like, oh, okay, so I don't have as much of that until I get enough points to put in the stat. I think Dark Souls 1, if you picked like the class with a shield, gave you like a 100% block shield. It might have been like 90, but it was still like a high block shield. Mm. I think the highest block shield that you can get starting in Dark Souls 2 is like 70 or 60 or something like that. And so like that is kind of tough because sitting there and blocking doesn't save you, and rolling is much harder. But once you get over that initial hump, once you get a few levels in, I do think it is one of the easier games just because it's the enemies stop respawning. So if you get stuck, but you can beat the enemies up into the boss, eventually you can just run to the boss. Like you don't have to fight anything anymore, which is nice. It's kind of like, to me, a nice little quality of life thing. They give you life gems to heal with. And so you can eventually, like, if you're having a whole lot of trouble, you can just farm and have unlimited healing items, essentially. Because I think you can hold like a stack of 99 of those or something like that. And so that's kind of nice. And I think just, like I said, they tie your dodge invincibility to a stat. So you can also just level that stat up and just get a really, really good feeling roll eventually. So it's one that holds a special place in my heart. It's higher up on my list. It's one that objectively I can look at and see is like not it probably is too high on a list if I was just being objective about how I am ranking these, but since this is my personal list, it gets some points for nostalgia and just like being my first FromSoft game that I fully beat and like got to experience. So all that said, my number 5 is Dark Souls.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is where I put the original one. I still think it's really good, but old game is old. And
you've played other games since it came out.
Yeah, I've played other games, and every FromSoftware game that I play past Dark Souls just makes Dark Souls feel just that a little bit older. And now that we're in a day and age too, where we're getting some pretty good like AA or non-FromSoft Souls-likes, Dark Souls is feeling even more old, I think. Still very good, still one that I have a lot of nostalgia for and do enjoy, playing. I've got it on Switch, so I'll bust it out occasionally and just like play it on Switch because that's like a fun little handheld experience for me. But and like I said, I do think it has the best exploration of all of them, but it feels old. And I think a lot of the quality of life stuff puts it at number 5 for me.
I'm curious to see if we end up with the same number 4 then, because my number 4 is Dark Souls 3.
We do end up with the same number 4.
So Dark Souls 3 for me is one, like I said, blitzed through it pretty much co-op with you the first time I played it and was like, that was fine. That was a fine game. It was more Dark Souls. Going back and replaying through it on my own for Dark Souls month, I feel like fell in love is definitely a strong word, but it grew on me. It definitely has, I feel like we talked about this on the episode, like the middle of the game, there's some levels and some areas and stuff that kind of like bog down and kind of hold the overall experience back a little bit for me. I also still think that it suffers from some of the embering and like hollowing, invasioning and all that kind of stuff that all 3 of these games, in my opinion, suffer from. I can see it being a pro, like for some people, but for me, like getting invaded and wasting my time when I'm trying to just play through the game was frustrating. But I really like the setting. I really like the callbacks to the first game. I really like the lore. I like the obvious Bloodborne influences. Like they had some leftover enemies from Bloodborne and they were like, you know what? This is fine for Dark Souls 3. Let's just throw them in there. So all of that kind of works in Dark Souls 3's favor. I also went through with just like a pure strength build, like very intentional with what I wanted to do. And I think that helped me have like a optimal character towards some of the harder parts of the game where I was like, I didn't feel too overwhelmed really ever, except for a few bosses. And so, along with that, we've mentioned multiple times now about Dark Souls 1 and 2 feeling old. 3, is in that spot now where like it's starting to show its age a little bit, especially visually is probably the number one place it shows its age is in its visuals. But it still feels great. It handles great. The character responds amazing. The combat feels so much more cinematic and intentional, and it feels like you could stand it up next to the rest of FromSoft's modern catalog and it wouldn't feel out of place.
Yeah.
That's why for me it landed at number 4 above the other two.
And very similar in my boat, where Dark Souls 3, another one that I got at launch, another one that I got to go through and just kind of experience. It's at the top of my list of everything from here on out's going to be like, this is a game that I hold dear for personal reasons versus like Dark Souls 3 objectively is a very good game. And I think probably one of the best in FromSoft's catalog, but it's also like the next 3 games that we're going to talk about on my list. It's like, well, these are great specifically for me. Like I would not be shocked to see somebody put Dark Souls 3 as like their number 2 or 1 or something like that. You know, it wouldn't be surprising. And I think, again, for a lot of the same reasons you said, it feels the most modern. I mean, it is 7 years old at this point, but it's still, you know, it came out on the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. So it does still feel more modern than most of the other ones.
The generational gap is not as strong as 360 to Xbox One.
Exactly. Exactly. Like there are parts of it where, you know, like it runs at a nice buttery smooth frame rate for people that care about that. But there are parts of it where it does, I think, look a little bit better even than Elden Ring at times, because Elden Ring sometimes gets a little bit muddy and foggy just with all that it's trying to do. Like I think Dark Souls 3 was able to be a little bit prettier sometimes, like not everywhere, but sometimes just because it was a more linear, condensed world.
In some of its environments, yeah, I could definitely see that. But Elden Ring just looks so much cleaner.
Yeah.
And crisper. And part of that's the art direction, like it was going for a slightly more high fantasy look.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, I mean, Elden Ring is Elden Ring technically a current gen game? I want to say it. I mean, it released for like Series X and PS5, but I think it released for last gen too. Like, I don't think it's.
Did it? I don't know. I thought it just was new stuff. Came out. Okay, it did come out on PS4 and Xbox One. Wow.
Yeah, so it's.
I did not realize that.
I don't know how it played on those systems or what it looked like, but
I kind of want to like install it on my Xbox One, like dig that out and just see.
I bet the loading times are a lot longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, just I think that in specifically like character models and some of that kind of stuff and like boss models, things like that, Dark Souls 3 looks a lot muddier. But I do think Dark Souls 3 has some really cool environments, and that's part of what I liked about like the beginning and end portions of the game.
Yeah.
And the DLC too, to a certain extent, is just that like it has that really awesome kind of gothic castle, like knights and dragons, but in the most unforgiving way possible. And it just I really like that aesthetic and that part of the game. It's kind of the like swamps and caverns and stuff like that and like I did kind of like the Bloodborne village, but I much prefer in Dark Souls like doing the castle and stuff like Stormvale felt very much like an homage to Dark Souls games from in Elden Ring.
Yeah. And then like combat wise for me, like Elden Ring obviously has some improvements and some quality of life stuff combat wise, but the combat in Dark Souls 3 feels almost like a prototype of a lot of stuff Elden Ring was doing. Like they had
the weapon stances,
stances and stuff. They had the mana bar, which was new for free. I think they had it in Demon Souls, but they like Dark Souls 1 and 2. When you cast spells, it was just
took stamina.
No, it was each spell had like a number of times you could cast it, and then you would have to rest before you could cast it again. It kind of worked like spell slots in D&D.
I've never done Magic in those games, so
Yeah, well, and that's why a lot of people didn't, was because it was not like you couldn't. It was not a renewable resource like it kind of is in Dark Souls 3. So like they did a lot of cool things that I appreciated. The art and skyboxes for a lot of it was some of my favorites in these games. And there's a part of like, I do love the exploration and the freedom and discovery of a lot of these other games, but there's a part of me that sometimes kind of just likes Dark Souls 3's like very straightforward, like you go here, then you go here, then you go here thing. Because sometimes I don't feel like remembering where I have to go.
Yeah.
And I do like a lot of the like bosses in Dark Souls 3, but it is starting, like you said, to show its age, but I still think it's one of all of the ones that follow are amazing games. It's just, I also like the thing that put them over the edge, the thing that moved them up above Dark Souls 3 was that it did more for me personally than Dark Souls 3 did, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And like you mentioned on one of our episodes about there being kind of a line where going back to the games, they still feel more modern, and that line kind of being Bloodborne. Like Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, that was kind of when the boss fights became like the iconic staple of these games, because there are some very memorable and tough and visually impressive boss fights in Dark Souls 3 that, you know, they'll be the kind of bosses that you never forget kind of thing. So cool. So we both had number 4. We definitely will not have the same number 3 because that is where I put Sekiro.
Yeah.
Talk about a game that probably is the best looking visually in their catalog still. That game looks really good, you know, probably
it does,
partially because of its linearity and kind of smaller scope in like world, and also they didn't have to design 5 billion weapons and spells and things like that.
Yeah, and it did have a, like, compared to a lot of the rest of them, it does have a very unique art style. Like even Bloodborne, arguably one of the more different ones in the catalog. Like you said, you can see aspects of Bloodborne in some of their other games versus Sekiro, where it's like, nope, this is kind of its own thing over here. So
like you were saying, these top 3 are all kind of, they're here for more personal reasons. Sekiro, just like I said earlier, just really clicked with me. So it locked in that top 3 spot. What did you have at number 3?
I have number 3 as Dark Souls 2.
Okay.
So Dark Souls 2, I think we have the same number 2 and number 1.
Yeah,
but
the list
Dark
is
Souls
about
2,
to be very similar.
But Dark Souls 2 is, like I said, a personal favorite of mine just because it was my first Dark Souls. I liked a lot of what it does. Going back, it does feel old. Going back, there are some frustrations even that I have with my rose-colored glasses on, just because, you know, it's a game that's like 10 years old at this point. But it is still, I think it was the first game that I finished that, I don't know that New Game Plus was common at this point in gaming history either, but it was one that I beat and got the New Game Plus and immediately rolled into New Game Plus, beat again, and then rolled into like a third New Game Plus because I loved the game so much. And so it is one that I really enjoy and like to go back to, even if it's the Scholar of the First Sins, and I feel lost sometimes because I don't recognize what is going on or where they have moved new enemies to. But it is one that I feel like is worth experiencing, but it's high up on my list. I would not fault anyone for putting it much lower on their list because it is at number 3 for subjective personal reasons, not because objectively it is better than Dark Souls 3 or, you know, some of these other games.
Well, moving on to number 2 if my gut is correct and we have the same
Yeah.
number 2 here, then it's time to talk about the new kid on the block.
It is.
Elden Ring.
Yep.
Which, I'm not going to lie, it's pretty apparent now what our number 1 is.
What?
And if that game wasn't so, like you say with Dark Souls 2, if it wasn't so special to me for personal reasons and wasn't just like the ultimate kind of comfort game at this point, like, especially going back now and playing Elden Ring, what is it, 2 years after release, and kind of rediscovering it. And like when I was replaying through Limgrave and Stormvale and some of these other places, I was hit with nostalgia already.
Yeah.
And I was also just like hit with, man, this game is so good. It took, like, objectively, taking bias, like taking any kind of personal bias out of this list, it's number 1. Like there's no real competition.
Any real ranking, just like no personality, no like, oh well, I think this game is special, or this was my first Dark Souls game, or whatever. Yeah, this is number 1.
Yeah, there's no, and it took everything from all the games we've talked about so far, least of all Sekiro probably, but it did take like crouching and stealth and some of that stuff that Sekiro did. It took all of that and combined it in a master, like they could have combined a lot of that stuff and it felt really clunky, but no, it combined it all really well. They tackled open world for the first time, and they did that in an extremely satisfying way. And my biggest complaint with Elden Ring initially was, if I want to replay Dark Souls 3, or if I want to replay Sekiro, or if I want to replay Bloodborne, that seems like a much more attainable goal in my mind than replaying Elden Ring, because it took me 100 and however many hours to get through Elden Ring. However, on replay, I'm discovering that that's not necessarily the truth. Like,
it's only if you want to experience everything.
It was only that first blind playthrough of like wanting to see what every rock had underneath it. Whereas now, going through with this new character with a specific build that I'm trying to build out, and I'm trying to just kind of get it DLC ready. Yeah. And like, I think I'm at like 29 hours, and I could go to Farum Azula right now, but I haven't because I don't want the world to be on fire. And it's like I've done, and I haven't really skimped on a lot of stuff, but like I know all the bosses now, so I'm able to go in and beat Margit. I'm able to go in and beat Godric on like my first or second attempt, whereas like you and I spent a whole afternoon trying to beat Godric when we first played the game. So it's like, again, the more you kind of know the game, or it depends on what you're kind of going into it for, it doesn't have to be that 150 hour epic that it was the first time you played it. But I also really like, that's a very special gaming experience to me, because playing through the game blind at the time of release, and you and I just having that like old school gamer moment conversations of like, did you know if you did this thing that this is here, or have you found this yet? Or where did you get that? I haven't seen that at all. And like having those conversations and going through the game blind, and I think you beat Godric first, and so then it was you trying to help me co-op through him. I think we did it on stream where we finally beat him.
Yeah, but it was still like hard. Like I was still dying all the time. You were still dying all the time.
We were still struggling, because I was in there with like the sword I started with and a shield. And I think you did like a dex build. I knew you ultimately became like a bleed dex build. I don't know if that's what you started with, but it was like, we went from there and went to go like try to fight Renala. And I remember that being such a hard fight. And then after losing to her, or maybe finally barely beating her, going back to, why can't I think of the hub's name?
The round table hold.
Yeah, going back to the round table hold and being like, oh, look at this pile of upgrade materials I have that I haven't been using. Maybe I should use those. And then like going back out into the world and one-shotting stuff and being like, that probably would have helped with those bosses, And just like those kind of things only happen once. Like we know what a site of grace is, essentially. We know what bonfires are. We know what souls are and how to level up. We know the stats and all that, but we were still learning the language of this game. Like you have Godric and Godfrey and Godwyn and all these characters, and you're just like, I have no idea what is happening. I remember Stormvale Castle, and it still does, like, it is kind of the biggest legacy dungeon, but like I felt like that was never going to end. And we completely missed, at least when I went through it the first time, I completely missed where you can like jump off the ledge where the birds are, and then there's a Crucible Knight at the bottom, and you can loop around. That's where you find that elevator that will like bring you up and down. Like I found that on like a third playthrough, where I was just like, oh, I did not know this was here. And so after spending probably what felt like 2 solid days in that castle, there was still stuff for me to find on replay. And so, and you talk about like the opposite of Sekiro, this game, there's so much flexibility in how you want to approach it and what you want to do. And there's so much, like this was so many people's first Souls game because you had your spirit summons you could call in, PvPing, or not PvPing, co-oping was so much easier. PvP was so less intrusive. It's like the NPC summons and things, like it just, everything seemed a lot easier to understand, and a lot, like the game was a lot more willing to help new players. And so it kind of took everything that Dark Souls had done and then leveled it up by like 100 across the board. And I've wrestled with if this should even be my personal number one. There's just that kind of first love bias that, you know, it can't quite topple over. But like we said when we started this, objectively, it's one of the best games of all time, honestly. Yeah. But it definitely, if you're listening to this because you just like us, and maybe you haven't played a lot of these games, but you're maybe kind of interested because we've been talking about them so much, like this is the one to start with this check out first, because I have complete faith that you can get through this game and you'll have a good time. And it has a lot in common with like Breath of the Wild and other games as far as like rewarding exploration and like a magical world to discover. So yeah, that's why it's my number 2.
Yeah, and I'm in a very similar boat. You mentioned Breath of the Wild just now. Breath of the Wild didn't click with me like it did for a lot of people, but when I hear people talk about their like Breath of the Wild experience, I feel like that's the experience I had with Elden Ring, where you come up out of, like after the little tutorial area, you come up out of it and the world is just like opening up. And there's all these things kind of wandering around,
and there's music playing
in the distance.
The music was such a good decision. From like Sekiro was the only other game up to this point where they had music in the levels, other than like a few maybe special things here and there. But yeah,
and so you get out there, and it's like you can go any of those places instead of it being like kind of a hallway or something. It's like, nope, you can go any direction you want, pretty much. You know, you get a horse very quickly.
Remember how we kept feeling like this has to be the whole map, and then you'd find another map and it would like grow again, and you're like, how big is this game? And then you go underground,
they like trick
and
you.
Like, how big is this game?
Yep. So it's such a good game. It's so fantastic. It definitely has it's still hard, don't get me wrong, but it definitely has the most generous difficulty curve. And there are so many things that you can do to make it easier, even to the point of like very early on, you can kind of just like cheese your way to just like leveling up a ton if you want to. And so like, you know, it's definitely where I'd recommend you start if you haven't played these types of games and you want to get into them. It gives you the most flexibility. It gives you the most amount of things that you can do, most options. If you get stuck somewhere, you can just go a different direction, go farm, go do something else.
That's what I was going to say, is like you could, in any other FromSoft game, you would fight through like that first camp and you would get to Margit, and then you would beat your head against him until you got into Stormvale. In this game, you could play the game for probably like 10 hours or more before you even get up to that fight, leveling up and finding weapons and all that kind of stuff. Or you could get to him immediately, be like, oh, this is too tough, and then go explore and check things out, level up your weapon, level up your character. And Like that's not an option in any other FromSoft game. Like once you're
Exactly.
at that boss, it's like, all right, I got to figure out
Yeah.
how to beat this boss so I can keep going.
Yeah, like if you're lucky, there may be like one or two other places that you can kind of progress and level up, but eventually you're going to hit a boss wall there too, you know, versus this where it pretty much is just like, go do whatever, really. You know, you mentioned too about like just discovering new things and you're replaying it and, you know, kind of finding like, ooh, a very quick run. I'm replaying it as well. I'm trying to, I did a different strategy where I started to try to collect all of the things, and I started with the deprived character, which is just like the low amount of stats and everything, so that you like if you respec, I can kind of decide which direction I want to go in the DLC, and also I can have like all of the weapons available, so I can kind of just pick what I want to do in the DLC. That's what I'm trying to do. So I'm going through kind of with like a checklist that tells me like everything that's in the game. And when this game came out, like in 2020, 2021, 2021,
2022.
2022, when this game came out in 2022, we put so much time into it. I think my first character has like 200 hours or more because I went through the game and then I did like 2 or 3 new game plus runs. And then I have my like secondary character that I was just like messing around with that's probably at like 60 or 70 hours. And then I'm going through, so like I put a ton of time into this game and now I'm going through it again. And I'm like checking off all of the like important items, and there's still so many little areas that like I didn't know existed ever. And so the fact that I'm still discovering new things in this game after putting 300 hours or more into it is mind-blowing to me, because it's just kind of like, man, I didn't even know that there was a cave down here where there's, you know, like this item or this weapon or this, you know, boss in here. I didn't know you could do this thing. Like, I think I knew about it previously, but like when we were going through, like getting the puppets, like doing Saluvius's quest line and like turning people into puppets or whatever, I thought it was just like a binary choice between like Nephilu or not Nephilu. I didn't know that there were like 3 or 4 other people you could turn into puppets. And so it's just kind of like learning all of these things and finding it out as you go has just been such a nice experience that scratches my discovery itch. So Elden Ring is an amazing game. It's definitely in like one of my all-time favorite games of all time list. Like if we were making a top 10 list, a lot of these games would probably be on it, but I can guarantee Elden Ring and our number 1 would both be on it.
Yeah. I'm in the point now with Elden Ring with my playthrough where I'm exploring a little bit more, slowing down and exploring a little bit more because I kind of rushed through the like back chunk of that game on my first playthrough. I'm very familiar with like the first half of Elden Ring. And so now that I'm in like the back half, I'm poking around a little bit more because a lot of it does feel new to me because I didn't see a lot of it the first time around. But yeah. You mentioned how many hours we have in Elden Ring, and I may still have more in my number 1, which is, you guessed it, Bloodborne.
What? It's not the Monster Hunter game that FromSoft made?
Yeah, the like PSP Japanese only. So I'm replaying Bloodborne now because so what I did, I'd been playing all the Dark Souls games for this month, right? And I knew we had this ranking coming up, and I was like, well, let me put Sekiro back in. Let me put Bloodborne back in. Let me kind of run around in those games a little bit just so that I, you know, can be a little bit more fresh going into this conversation in my list. And I played about maybe an hour of Sekiro, and then I started Bloodborne.
Appropriate. You hit the first boss, huh?
No, I picked up a save that was already like 12 hours in or something. So I don't think I like cleared a level more than a boss, but
yeah, the fun part of that game.
Yeah. So then I made a whole new character in Bloodborne.
Yep.
And I've already done everything up to the Forbidden Woods, and I'm going into the Forbidden Woods. And on the PlayStation, on the PS5 specifically, when you're like kind of hovering over a game, it shows you like your hours played. And I don't know if it takes into account my PS4 hours for Bloodborne, because it's a PS4 game, but I don't know if the clock started with this console or what. I don't know how that works, but I'm like 4 hours shy of 200 currently on Bloodborne.
Yeah.
And when I was just sitting there like looking at my phone or whatever, and I had it hovering over the game, my wife looked up and was like, I think this was before I really even got like this playthrough going, but she was like 186 hours. I'm like, yeah. I mean, and then I started thinking about it. I was like, I played, my first playthrough, which probably was like the longest. Then I've done like definitely done some New Game Plus stuff. Then I did the co-op playthrough with you where we platinumed the game, which meant we went through Chalice dungeons.
The Chalice stuff. Yep.
And I mean, there's probably 60 hours just fighting that amygdala. And then I started a arcane character that's now in the DLC, sitting at Maria. And then I just started this character. So I'm like, yeah, I do have, and every time I boot it up and I start playing, it feels like home. Like this game it was the first one I played. I was very intrigued by the setting. I had just gotten a PlayStation 4. I had just bought it for Spider-Man. I'd finished Spider-Man. I went into GameStop basically and picked up like 5 or 6 games that I had heard of on PlayStation that everybody talked about, and Bloodborne was one of them. I didn't really even realize that it was like a Dark Souls game when I first started playing it. And then the more I kind of I couldn't get through Central Yharnam, and I was like, oh, this is a scary game. This game is really tense. And it's horror, but it's also like the risk and reward thing that just makes these games more kind of intense in general. And so I ended up finally getting through my first playthrough. And then after that, it was on. I think I bought the DLC because I didn't have it yet. And it was my gateway into probably what is now my favorite genre of video games in Soulslikes. Like, I'm the guy that will seek out all of these B tier, C tier Soulslikes and try them. I'll play the 2D ones. I'll, whatever. I love this genre. And Bloodborne was like, it opened the floodgate and it welcomed me into this new world of gaming. And outside of it being my first, just the unique kind of cosmic horror, like wolf hunt, gothic Victorian setting of it all is just so cool. And the gun parry, the not hiding behind the shield, the trick weapons, it's just, and it just works so well. And they took a setting that's already kind of like interesting and creepy and whatever, and they just nailed it. They turned it to 11. The beasts you're fighting, the cry of the cleric beast as you're climbing up the ladder, just like. And this week I've been watching just a ton of like cut content videos for the game.
Yeah.
And there is so much more that they probably could have and would have done if they had had more time in development. But I guess, just kind of going back and like reading comments and stories and stuff about the game, it sounds like, their deal with Sony had them on a little bit more of a time crunch than they may have been on for some of their other games, aside from Sekiro, which is probably why we never got like DLC or anything for that game too. But I would love to see, I want to see more from this, and I don't know if we ever will. Yeah. But man, what a special game Bloodborne is. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's my number one for very similar reasons. I am a huge fan of cosmic horror and also a huge fan of Soulslikes. And so this game felt like it was checking so many boxes to the point where it's like, did they specifically make this game for me?
Yeah, and they put it on PlayStation.
Yeah, that's the only way that I know that it wasn't specifically made for me, because I never would have put it on PlayStation only. But it is, I mean, like I got, when you bought your PS5, you sold me your PS4, and obviously I bought it to experience a lot of the like Sony first party exclusives that I hadn't gotten a chance to play because I didn't own a PlayStation.
Which you still haven't played.
But which I still haven't played. And a big part of that was because Bloodborne just stayed in the console for like a year and a half because like we played through it. Like when I got it, we played through it. And then I kept playing through it. And then every time I would go back to play like I'd swap back to Xbox and then I'd get back on the PlayStation. And it's like, well, before I swap out the discs, like let me jump into Bloodborne. And then I just play Bloodborne again.
Yeah.
So I too have started a new character recently and just like going back to this game, even after Elden Ring, I'm reminded just how good this combat system is and how much I like the way that it encourages you to be aggressive, that it encourages you to like not be afraid, like dodge around. You're not hiding behind a shield. You're not afraid to take some hits because it's kind of like a give and take, a push and pull sort of thing. And the trick weapons, like even though that means that ultimately there are less weapons, all of them feel unique. All of them feel like they are special, and it's exciting when you get a new one because you want to like put it on and just like mess around with it just to see like what's the transformation, what does it do? Versus, like Dark Souls or something. It's like, oh, you got a new sword and it swings just like every other sword. And, it's just like, it maybe has a little bit of a different look and it statistically, like stat wise, does some different points of damage or whatever. But in Bloodborne, it's like, oh, this is like the saw cleaver and this is the switch axe. Is that? No, that's a Monster Hunter thing. What's the axe one?
Just like the hunter's axe.
Yeah, like here's the axe that transforms from like an axe into a pole arm. Here's the two knives that you can put together to make sort of like a nunchuck looking thing.
Here's the small sword that when you stick it into its sheath becomes just a giant club shaped like a sword, essentially.
Exactly. And like just aesthetically and everything just seems so cool. It has such a unique and awesome art style. And like I said, like the cosmic horror elements I think are awesome. And even though it still suffers a little bit from like the FromSoft, like what the fuck is going on syndrome, that's almost a little bit appropriate in like a cosmic horror game because that's how you're supposed to feel.
Yeah.
There are some frustrating points to it. Like it's not a perfect game. Like we said, if I was doing this objectively, like there would be some dings to it because of like things like the Chalice dungeons just get rough. We platinum the game. That is never something I will do again because even though it was kind of cool to eventually fight Queen Yarnum, the journey to get there is miserable.
Yeah, to be fair, that's all completely optional.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a few other like little just annoyances in the game, but and it is aging, but I do feel like it has aged better than a lot of the other FromSoftware stuff just because of
its art direction and stuff like that.
Yeah. And just the way that it feels and plays. I think because it plays faster, it doesn't feel as old as Dark Souls 2, which came out just a year before it. So
yeah, I mentioned earlier how Bloodborne does kind of front load some of the difficulty and there can be a bit of a hump to get into this game. However, I think it also does a lot. Like Dark Souls has an overwhelming amount of stuff that you think you need to know when you start that game. Like you can have 3 different rolling speeds based on how much gear you're holding. Your weapon is degrading. You can be hollowed or human and your humanity level can go up. Just all these kind of layered systems. And I don't know if it was because of the like shorter development time or if it was intentional, but a lot of that is stripped out of Bloodborne. Like when you die, your health stays the same. You're not going to drop to like half health or anything like that. When your weapon can degrade, but you're not ever really going to notice it. It almost isn't even a mechanic. You're never going to hold too much gear and not be able to fast roll, because that's like a core component of the game is how you dodge. You don't really even roll, you like two-step or whatever. But so like it does kind of simplify a lot of the language that some of the other From games I feel like get bogged down by.
Yeah.
That being said, like similar to Sekiro, just because you know how to do something doesn't mean that it's easy. Like they want you to learn how to play this game before you get into it. And so like Central Yharnam now is one of my favorite levels in a video game ever. But like I remember the struggle playing through that the first time.
Well, even like going back in my most recent character, like I died 3 or 4 times just on like that first street in Yharnam because
you can get overwhelmed.
They throw so many enemies at you all at once. Once I got past that street, I went straight to Gehrman, beat him in one shot, and like went through.
Oh, so you beat the game already?
No, not the game. Or not Gehrman.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Gascoigne.
Yeah.
Like beat him in one shot, went through the Cathedral Ward, went down, beat the Bloodstarved Beast in like a shot or two.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like after that initial like getting back into it and just that first street is very hard. It was like, oh, okay, back in the flow of things. It feels so good. So
yeah, and that first street, at least for me, as this being like my first FromSoft game, also teaches you that you can run past enemies and they leash eventually. So like that's why these games can be speed run in like an hour, even without glitches, is because if you can just like cheese the bosses, that's all you really need to do.
Yeah.
And that's just so kind of foreign in most video games. If you haven't played these games before, is that like, oh, yeah, I don't have to fight this stuff. An interesting mechanic that I didn't really pick up on until this replay of Bloodborne was like, where are my blood echoes?
Yeah.
Oh, the enemy with the glowing eye has them. I have to kill that enemy to get my blood echoes back. Because usually you can just pick them off the ground in like every other game. And this one, it's like they're on the ground occasionally, like if you fall to your death. But
and in bosses, they're on the ground.
And in bosses. But I had forgotten that like, if you die to an enemy, like they have your blood echoes. And it's like, oh, that's kind of tough. Because it's like, well, that's the thing that killed me before. And I have to kill it to get those back. That's kind of interesting. It's a choice. But yeah, Bloodborne,
fantastic.
Very, very special game. Very, very special game in a list of very special games. I'm very happy that FromSoft exists. I know their games are not for everybody. I know their games always spark conversations about difficulty options and approachability and things like that. And I think that From is getting better at,
I mean, Elden Ring is proof.
Yeah, exactly. They're getting better at providing, like making their games more accessible without just slapping an easy, medium, hard option at the beginning, which I appreciate. But they also have shown that like they're not afraid to do things like that in their other games with Armored Core 6, because Armored Core 6 was way more video gamey and approachable with like how it handled, like if you die to a boss, do you want to just like tweak your build from the menu real quick before you hit retry? And do you want to just hit retry and be right back in the boss fight, not having lost anything by dying, like, so them as a studio, they're not opposed to different ways of structuring approachability and difficulty and stuff, which I like, which means that, hey, if they want to just keep the Souls stuff, this more like difficult, kind of obtuse, whatever, and then maybe some of their other games can be more traditionally approachable, that'd be cool. But I do think, like we said, Elden Ring has shown that they are doing things in their own way to make these games. I mean, Elden Ring was played and beaten by more people beat that game than probably played the rest of their games altogether.
Yeah. Just like statistically too.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If you look at the breakdowns, like, because on Xbox, it shows you how many people have beat which bosses, because there's like achievements for bosses and stuff.
Yeah.
And Elden Ring, I haven't looked recently, but I am pretty sure that the last time that I looked, the percentage of people that beat Elden Ring's final boss was way higher than the number of, like, the percentage of people that have beat any, like, Dark Souls final boss.
Yeah.
I think right now their main my main critique of them is still like, I would love it if they would just make it a little bit more obvious, like what is, like how to make the game easier for yourself. Because I do think there are a lot of people out there who would love these games. I do think it's just sometimes because they don't explain, well, here's like, because there aren't difficulty options, because they kind of build that into the gameplay mechanically. Sometimes they don't make it clear to people who are not familiar with that language of that game. Well, what do I need to do? Like, we know, okay, if you want sort of easy mode, you get your summon, you get your, spirit ash, you get your, like,
you pick like a magic build or something like that.
Yeah, you pick a build that can do this, or, like you make sure that you have, like, you co-op. But if you don't know that language, it's like, well, I'm dying to Tree Sentinel over and over again. I don't know that I'm,
yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's just like, I would love it if you didn't have to go to like a guide to understand how to make it easier for yourself. But also, it's much, in the year of our Lord 2024, it's much easier to, like, I feel like most people are playing these types of games with a guide now.
Yeah. Or at least a wiki or something to kind of help them out.
Yeah. It was a lot harder, like back in the day, to figure out how to make these games easier for yourself. But overall, I mean, FromSoft, like we said at the beginning, all 7 of these games are fantastic games that are amazing. Unless Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, is secretly Bloodborne 2. I don't see my list shifting a whole lot. Do you see Shadow of the Erdtree shifting your list?
No, probably not, just because of the reasons stated before. And honestly, like I looked at my previous ranking last time we did this.
Yeah.
The only thing that really changed was that I swapped Dark Souls 3 and 2 and I slotted Elden Ring in. So my list is pretty locked in at this point. I don't see Shadow of the Erdtree. Like I said, I personally even wrestle with like Elden Ring and Bloodborne. Like they're pretty neck and neck up there. So I could see Shadow of the Erdtree being like, does Elden Ring deserve to be number 1? And then I'll play Bloodborne again and be like, nah, it can't. I'm sorry. It just can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I am very excited for that. So be looking forward to definitely some content on that when it finally arrives in June.
Yeah. It's mid-June.
Yeah. So cool. Well, as far as housekeeping goes for this episode, our next episode, we will be doing our community conversation about Souls games. We have a pretty good amount of some really good responses that we're going to go over that we got in our Discord channel, in our Discord server. So if you want to be part of conversations like that in the future, hop in our Discord, join, come be part of the conversation there. I'm not really going to plug it here because by the time this hits the airwaves, we've probably recorded that episode already, so it's too late for Dark Souls month. But we are going to try to integrate community stuff a little bit more going forward, whether it's maybe like a question or something in episodes, or whether we do like a community focused episode every now and then like we're doing here. We're just kind of playing around with it, but the bigger our community, theoretically, the bigger and better those episodes can be.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, it's a little early for this, but if you've been listening to Dark Souls Month, thank you so much. And also, especially if you're not like a big Souls person and you've been listening, appreciate that.
Yeah.
We would really be interested in hearing, like, did you enjoy this experiment? Would you like to see us tackle other video game series? Like, we've kicked around the idea of Gears of War or Tomb Raider or the Arkham games, or, some of these.
Yeah. Wolfenstein.
Yeah. Some of these series that have like enough titles. Enough titles without being like Halo or Assassin's Creed, where we'd have to do Assassin's Creed year. Yeah.
I know we did talk about how we've put like 300 plus hours in the Elden Ring each, but, also a manageable length of game where it's not like,
right.
We're going to do Final Fantasy month. And then it's like, well, okay, we had time to play one Final Fantasy game.
Exactly. So I'll probably put this call out in the Discord after the final episode wraps. But if you hear this and you want to chime in, either you can in Discord or shoot me a message or whatever, kind of what you've thought about this experiment, and if you'd like to see us maybe tackle some other series in the future.
Yeah.
And if it's not a series too, you could throw out, just games that you want us to talk about. I know we got some anonymous feedback on our survey that we posted recently that we should play a Pokemon game and talk about it so that we wouldn't be so hard on them anymore.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I played Monster Hunter Stories too. It's like the same thing.
So if you have any kind of games that you think would be fun for us to chat about, we'd love to hear that as well. But yeah, I've enjoyed this experiment so far.
We did it mostly for us. So
definitely for us, but we are considering doing it for like other series. So, if you have any kind of preference for that, we'd be interested in hearing it. Part of Dark Souls month is YouTube videos, and we had one right as we started this month. We had a Sea of Thieves video go out, but now we've actually got.
I didn't realize that
themed.
Wednesday was in. I think Wednesday was like the first day of April or whatever.
It was probably like the 3rd or something, because April 1st was Dark Souls. Yeah, it like the first and last day of April. We barely are squeaking in episodes, but yeah, we have a Dark Souls video out there now, Dylan.
Yes, we do. We Sea of Thieves was arguably the Dark Souls of pirate games, maybe, I don't know. And then now we talked, like we said in this episode, if you're wanting to start getting into like Soulslikes or FromSoftware's games, start with Elden Ring. But if maybe Elden Ring was your first, as it was for many people, and you're, wanting to kind of see where the series, like where these games got their start, or maybe you're just wanting to play Dark Souls games because you've heard good things about them. You've heard sort of the reverence which a lot of people in gaming talk about these games with. We put out a video kind of giving my thoughts on where you should start. And so if you're wanting to get into the games and you've never played them before, it's geared towards that. It's not geared towards like you're a FromSoftware fan that has played every single one of these games that we just talked about this episode. Like it's geared towards somebody who is either has never played a FromSoftware game or has only played maybe Elden Ring and is wanting to get into them. And so that video is out on our YouTube channel. If you're interested in that, we'd love it if you went to go check that out. We've also got a short version of this episode coming out as a video. If you're listening to this and you've made it like 2 hours into an episode, that one is kind of, like I said, that's us kind of giving our like radio back of the box blurb about our lists, and then it'll have some gameplay, some trailers. So if you're wanting to see like more visually and in like a shorter version, or if you're trying to like sell somebody on our channel and you're like, watch this, that's the short version of it. It'll still probably be like 10-15 minutes long, but
yeah, the idea behind that video is more like, hopefully you're here because you wanted more of our like in-depth thoughts on the ranking versus you just finished this podcast and you're like, let me go listen to the short version.
Yeah, we're trying to upsell from the video, not downsell from the podcast really on that one. So, but it is also, we ranked, like one of our first videos ever on this channel was ranking the FromSoftware games. And we did that before Elden Ring is out, before Andrew had beaten Dark Souls, before I had beaten Sekiro. And so now we've gotten a chance to, we're going back and re-ranking them with more games played and beaten. And so kind of updating our list there.
Nice. Well, that will do it for our ranking of the FromSoftware Souls style games. Thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate it. And praise the sun.